presents the great things that he will share with us. And then we're going to have high quality streaming, so there's no weird audio stuff going on at that point. So at the bottom of your screen, you guys will see a link shortly. Give me 2 seconds. And it should pop up now. So everybody click that little green button. I'm going to go ahead and mute Mark. So Mark, go ahead, click on the start stream key, and let's get started. Let's check it out. Everybody at the bottom of the screen, click the watch webinar button, and we're going to join Mark, and then we're going to come back for a time of Q&A to answer some questions and continue to pick on his brain and all the great stuff he's going to share with us right now.
Okay, cool. I assume you can still hear me, Dan. I'm going to just wait till you give me the final go-ahead that the stream is up and running.
You're great.
I'll crack on. We're good, right?
Sound great, man.
Okay, excellent. So we're looking at, I believe, let's get this straight. You're looking at 2 screens now. You can see my controller here, which is my controller of choice. It is just a controller. And you can see what is my Ableton Live DJing template with a few little extra things in there that I've just thrown in at the last minute just to spice things up a little bit. What I wanted to do, as with all good presentations, is start with a very short demonstration, and then I'll explain step by step what's going on in this template and how it's working. So without further ado, let's get some beats on. Okay, so without going into like an epic set, which is what I'm always inclined to do when I start playing with this, you just get a brief overview there of the kind of how I'm moving around a little bit. But there's a lot to this setup, And effectively, it's based around a very simple 2-deck setup. Now, over the years, I've tried many different setups involving 2 decks, 4, 8, lots of loops of different stuff, editing things. And what I found was that actually, when you're DJing, usually 2 tracks is enough. And most of you who work with Traktor and Serato will also be familiar with basically working with 2 decks. But it's also nice to be able to have additional content, additional loops and stuff. And that's the core principle of this setup here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through these 2 center channels here. So on the Vestax VCM here, and this could literally be any controller, this one I particularly love because it actually feels and is arranged very much like a conventional mixer. So it's very intuitive to play on this device. It just kind of, it makes sense in terms of where things are. Now, the two center decks here, basically you can see in my Ableton window here, deck A and deck B. What we've got working from the bottom up, we've got volume. You can see how I'm moving the volume to 0 or infinity, and then I'm moving it all the way to the top. You'll notice that I've constrained the ranges here so that when it's right the way at the top, it only goes to -6. And the way that is done is in the mapping. I'm going to open up the mapping window here just to give you a little idea of the kind of level of mapping that's going on. There's quite a lot, it looks like, but remember there's 6 tracks here. So there's basically 6 repetitions. You can kind of see that there's a bit of repetition here. And within the mapping window here, it's possible to constrain ranges. So for example, here you can see that this volume control here is constrained to the range -infinity to -6 dB. And this is a really important feature that I employ a lot because constraining ranges to what's useful really enables you to be a much more kind of musical and spontaneous with your mixes, and it stops you having to worry too much about going outside of ranges or of having huge amounts of range with parameters that don't really do anything. So you can constrain parameters to the sweet spots. Now let's have a look at deck A here. I'm going to go into the contents of the deck. Now obviously I'm not going to go into warping. Warping is absolutely essential. It's a fundamental basic principle that you must grasp. More than happy to cover that with people in other lessons and stuff. I'm sure you can find content on it. I have my own approach to it that's really quick, so I can do it live. I can drag brand new tracks into a set while I'm playing, and I can warp them with pretty high confidence very quickly. And that's a skill that I've developed over quite a period of time, but it doesn't take long to learn. But once you've warped stuff and you've put it into live, obviously live can then track it in terms of the BPM. So everything that's in the set now will play at whatever the master BPM is that's assigned up here in the top left. Currently we're at 125.25 for whatever reason it is that I'm at that BPM. So everything will play at that BPM, and because of the global quantized set here, whenever I launch a clip or launch a song, it will start at the beginning of the next bar. Now that removes all of the beat matching that's necessary normally with vinyl and with CDs when you're not using sync. But I started on vinyl and I beat matched for years, and it's great, but it takes a lot of time. And it also then stops you or prohibits you from doing lots of other stuff. And I decided that when I moved over to digital format, I didn't really like the idea of CDs. I like the idea of digital, but I was willing to accept that computers can synchronize things better than I can. They can synchronize things to 44,000th of a second, and I can get it pretty close, but not quite that accurate. So I decided to let the computer do that, and then I've got more time to actually create the mix, to engineer the mix, and to do other interesting stuff. And for me, I just find that that's more fun. I'm not going to get into the debate about whether that's officially DJing or not. I don't give a monkeys about that. So anyway, from the bottom up, we've got volume. And then on the track here, you'll see we've got these standard sends. I've got a reverb and a delay set up on the return tracks. The reverb I've chosen for this particular setup is the Convolution Pro. It's a really nice reverb. It provides really beautiful tails, and it's really kind of modifiable, a really good sound. It has got an EQ built in, but I also throw an EQ3 on there. Oh look, I haven't upgraded that. I've thrown an EQ3 on there just to shelve any really low frequencies because, you know, it's dance music, you don't want super muddy low end. And I've also put a utility on here, and that's purely so that I can mute and unmute the reverb so that it shows up here with the button on or off. Now I could have used the activators here, but what that would have done, whether it's muted or not, illustrated by the lights here. So those are my sends, and they're on this row here, so all the sends are in the same place. I've got delay and reverb for each of these. The delay that I've chosen is Ping Pong. It's a fantastic delay. I've also added here a delay time calculator, which sometimes I find interesting to use because it shows me, I don't use synchronized delays. I've got two controls here, one for feedback and one for delay time. And that enables me to really nicely, to do some really funky stuff with the delay, especially when you right click on the top here and choose repitch mode. You get this, I'll demonstrate this, but you get this really cool repitching. I'm sure most of you are aware of this. If I just put this up. Okay, as a, you know, just with two controls, with delay, that just gives me a whole bunch of options. I can create builds with that. I can do really interesting syncopated delays that are off, on beat, between beats. Just for two knobs, for one delay, that's just, you know, it just provides me with a whole bunch of stuff. Really simple. And of course I can mute them with just these two mute buttons. I've also got here returns. These are volumes for the returns, and you'll notice they're not constrained. I can go all the way up to 0 because generally you control how much you're sending into the return tracks by the sends, obviously. So, you know, I just take it easy on the sends if I don't want too much coming back out. So moving then, I've skipped a couple of controls here deliberately because I'll explain in a bit, but so that these are the sends and returns, are the same for every track, okay? The thing that I've skipped here is actually on the Vestax VCM here. These are usually, using the control script, these are assigned to the cutoff frequency and the resonance of a filter. But what I've done with this, we've gone back into Deck A here to look at the effect rack, which when condensed looks like this. The effect track, what I did was I tried to emulate basically the sound and features of the Model 1 mixer. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Model 1 mixer. It was designed in collaboration with Richie Horton. I've had the pleasure of playing on one a few times, and I absolutely loved the functionality. I loved the way it was designed and the way that it was laid out. And I basically didn't have $3 to spend, so I emulated it as closely as I could with software. And the way that it works is that I've got a low pass filter here on the big knob. So that's my low pass filter, which you can see on the screen. And I've got at the top here a high pass filter. So I've got bidirectional filtering here. So let me just play this off again. So I can bring it down, bring it up. So I've got this great up and down filtering. And the resonance here works on both. And that just gives me a whole bunch of possibilities. Rather than having a low EQ and a high EQ, which is fairly common, it just gives me more functionality, and it gives me the ability to add resonance. And as you're probably aware with Live 9, Live 10, the auto filter has various different models here. Now, you can change, one of the things about the Model 1 is that the filter types on the channels were different to the filter types on the master, and that gave you, again, different tonality, different textures that you could use. And you can really choose these according to your own personal tastes. I quite like the PRD, which is, I believe, modeled on kind of like, what is it, I forget, it's modeled on a pretty dirty old analog filter. The MS2 I also like quite a lot. Which can over-resonate or self-oscillate if you put the resonation right up. But for DJing circumstances on big systems, that's a little bit risky. So Again, you can choose flavor that you want. You could have it clean if you want, and you can change. You can choose a different one for the high and low. I've just gone with this. It's what I like. In between them, okay, we then have this feature that is on the modal 1, and instead of having a high, mid, low, there's a high filter, high pass filter, a low pass filter, and then there's a single band parametric EQ. And the way this works, as Carl Cox so beautifully put it, is that you can tune in on a specific frequency. So what you can do, I've got two knobs here. One is gain, which allows me to add or subtract 15 dB of gain. There's no constraining on that. Oh no, 12 dB. I have constrained the upper limit to 12 dB, so it doesn't go too crazy. The lower, I can cut 15 dBs. And then I can sweep. So I can find a specific frequency, or a specific frequency rather, and tune in on it or play around with it. So, for example, can tune in on that hi-hat, or I could cut it out a bit, particularly like I can cut the body of a kick out, I can cut the attack of a kick out, I can give a lot of welly to certain parts of the track, and then I can use so I can just really isolate a part of, or a sound within a track. There's not much going on at the moment with this, but it's quite useful for picking out percussion sounds, hi-hats, for cutting out bass drums. You know, it's a much more creative tool. And you'll notice a really important feature here is that whenever I set any of these filters to 0, that the filter itself, the entire filter, deactivates. Okay, and again, this is done through mapping. And what that means is when I'm at full or maximum or minimum, the filter isn't in the signal path anymore, so it's completely neutral. If that wasn't the case, then even when your auto filter is on like maximum here, there's still a little bit of cutoff happening, and always around the cutoff frequency you're getting a certain level of boosting, and that's particularly problematic with high pass filters, because even if this is set to 26 Hertz, you're going to get a little bit of roll off and a little bit of resonance. Even when your resonance is set to basically neutral, you're not going to get a neutral signal. And the way that this is done, just to show you quickly, if I go back into the mapping, is that I've also mapped, so these are all mapped, sorry, all of these parameters here are mapped to the macros. So I'm using the macro mapping here to constrain these ranges, and then the MIDI mapping to constrain the ranges that are controlled directly from the controller here. So let's just go back to the macro mapping, and you'll see that here what I've done is the device on is enabled from the value 2 upwards. So at value 1 and 0, the device is deactivated. And with the other autofilter, the LPF autofilter, you can see that it's active from 0 all the way up to 125. So it's deactivated for values 126, 127. Now I didn't leave it to just the last value because I wanted to be sure there was a little margin of error just in case I didn't turn the knob all the way down to 0. If I just missed, you know, one value or whatever, it makes sure it definitely goes off. Okay, and that again is the same principle that's employed with the EQ8. You'll notice that it's not active, it's not engaged until I add some gain, and then that band comes on and it's active from then onwards. So that is my EQ, my parametric EQ, and my filters. The sends and returns and the resonance, of course, so that's pretty much everything. The one other thing that I've got here is I have got another knob, and I decided to use that for, well, I've got some things in this template that are third party. You can replicate them with native devices, which I'll show you briefly at the end. But in this case, I've got, what have I got on here? I've got a strobe effect, and this is a little plugin from a company called Sine Vibes. But you can do exactly the same thing here with the auto pan. And basically, it's just, I'll play it, you'll hear what it does. It's pretty obvious. Just does that. And I've also got a spare button down here, the crossfader sign, because I don't use the crossfader as a conventional crossfader, and that basically engages this plugin, which is a free one, TAL filter, and when I turn it on, it basically, well, it basically ducks the signal. And I find this is a really useful effect because when I'm mixing 2 or 3 loops and a couple of tracks, I can just really quickly cut you know, the kick transient out of the music and just get this really interesting pumping effect. Again, and that just makes space in the mix. So some of these tools are about making space, some are about effects. The other thing that I've got on here is this effect called Effect Tricks, and it's actually a multi-effect. It's a multi-effect developed by Sugar Bytes, and it does lots of different things, but I use it, let me just bring it on screen here. I use it because it has a real-time reverse effect, and actually it's not engaged on the individual track, but I have one on the master track here that I use, and that's what I use my crossfader for. So you might have noticed that I used this before. So that's, I mean, for me, that's a really beautiful effect. Don't use it a lot, but it's really great for accenting the end of phrases or for transitions and stuff. And having it on the crossfader here just makes it a lot of fun. So that's something on the master. I'm going to skip to and from the master as and where it's relevant, but I'm trying to keep this sort of focused on a track by track. So we've covered everything on deck A. Deck B is exactly the same, only obviously it's deck B. So we've got volume, we've got low pass filters with resonance, we've got sends and returns for delay and reverb, we've got a strobe effect on both of them, so that's like a gating, we've got a single band parametric EQ on both of them, and then we've got a high pass filter. The only other thing that we've got on here that I haven't mentioned is that we have kill switches, and these are high, mid and low kills, and they're activated through the EQ3. You can see here, really simple, and I've always loved kill switches. They're super useful for mixing when you've got multiple tracks because you can just isolate parts of the track really easily. Yeah, so that's basically your deck A and B. Now, that on its own is loads, and that's loads of fun, especially when combined with a few master effects. Okay, now while we're sort of on the subject of master effects, I will go through the master chain before I go back to the loop decks now. So the master chain, what I've got here is some stuff on the right hand side, and again, it's really simple stuff. I'm just going to launch a couple of other tracks here. Let's try. So we've got 2 tracks playing at the moment. I've got my reverse. Okay. I've also got what I call a Ritchie Horton filter. I mean, it is just an EQ8. But, you know, I mean, if you've ever seen Ritchie playing a set, you'll know exactly why I call it that. And I've got it mapped to what was the master volume here. So it's off, again, using this mapping the device on-off button to the same parameter. Again, it's multi-mapping, just makes things really easy. It means you don't have to press several buttons at the same time, or it just means you can control like a million different parameters with a few controls. So what this one does is really obvious. Okay, so that just gives me a really nice, basically a high pass filter. But I'm using EQ8 because it's super clean. It's a linear EQ. I've still got the adaptive Q on, so it has a little bit of an analog behavior to it. But it's, you know, super simple, really beautiful effect. Works amazingly every time. Above that, again, as you know, I've got the controls for the reverb, for the delay, the feedback, and the delay time. And then above that, again, I've got a whole bank of buttons and knobs, of which I'm only actually using 4. And these are sort of composite effects. And this is another beautiful thing about performing and DJing with live is, I mean, when you spend a lot of time working with, well, DJing, you generally spend a lot of time on Nexus gear, you know, on Pioneer stuff, and you're generally stuck with the same effects. I mean, there's a few these days, you know, there's at least 8 or maybe more actually. There's a few different effects, but they're the same effects on every device every time, and there's not really much room for customization. Whereas with live, you can build effects entirely how you want to do what you want. Now, I'm not going to go into extreme detail here because this rotor effect I built quite a while ago and I've refined over time. It's pretty complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on in there, but when it's shrunk down, it's just one button here, warp, turns it on, and this dials up the warp factor, which is what I decided to call it, and you'll see that actually when I open this out, it's controlling a whole bunch of different parameters across several different chains and doing some pretty funky stuff. Sounds a bit like this. Okay, so again, that's something I designed myself. I don't use the master effects like that very much, but it's great to have a few tricks up your sleeve for, you know, the big moments in the set. The other one I've got here is a wash. This originally started out as an effect built by Bassclef. Many of you may remember this from a while ago, Bassclef's Easy Washout. I modified it a bit because it wasn't giving me quite the result I wanted, but you'll be familiar with the sound. Okay, and again with this one, instead of having the mapping of the on-off of the device the same as the knob, I decided to have buttons because that enabled me to dial these all up, if you like, and then switch them all off really easily. And I can switch all the master effects off with one hand and mute the reverbs and delays all at the same time. So I can really stack the effects up and then kill them all really quickly. And of course, that kind of dynamic really has huge impact when you're playing, especially on big systems. So those are the top two here that are also assigned to these two buttons. The bottom two here are a little bit simpler, but also equally as much fun. This one here is a strobe for the master, which is obviously, you know, useful sometimes and kind of fun. And the last one is probably my favorite. Even though it's super simple, this pitch drop effect, which is a Max for Live device. Which, of course, is brilliant. Say no more about that. Just to finish off on the master, of course, I've got the reverse effect, which is mapped. I've literally mapped the global wet of that Effectstrix so that when I move the crossfader across, I get the reverse effect. When I move it back, I don't. And I can get sort of a blend of it as well, so I can get a small amount of reverse when I need it, but I tend to just sort of slam it on and slam it back out if I'm using it. And then, yeah, just finishing touch, we've got a limiter on the master there just to stop too much crazy stuff getting too crazy and driving the master too much. And then I've got this fantastic little device that was built by a friend of mine, James Waterworth, who does a lot of work for Isotonic Studios. You can't actually get this anymore. But it's, well, you might be able to find it. It's called Sound File Recorder, and basically you can set a location on your hard drive, hit record, and everything that hits this gets recorded straight to disk. So even if I'm recording the set into the arrangement mode, which I can also do, you know, I can hit record. Oh, look, I've got some stuff in here that I recorded before. I'd delete that. So if I wanted to record the whole set, I could just hit record before I start playing, and then everything will be recorded into the arrangement mode for editing later. Say you want to get a mix together for a podcast, or, you know, for a submission for something, and you don't want to have to worry about making a mistake, or you make a really bad mistake and you just want to fix it, then you can obviously do that in the arrangement. I have done that for some things in the past, but generally these days I just can't be bothered. I just play, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, I'd just do it again, or I'd give up on it. I mean, you know, for me, DJing is more of a hobby. I do DJing for fun more than I do it to make money. My days of doing that are long since past. But anyway, that's the master channel, the return channels. We've done that. We've done deck A and deck B. And now to the really fun thing is these loop decks. And it's really straightforward. Basically, the only trick to this is being able to capture the audio from either deck A or deck B and just play with a loop of it. Now, Ableton does have a looper device which enables you to capture any length of loop, but it's a little bit difficult to implement in this situation, and it also complicates things beyond what I see as being necessary. One of the things about performing live or DJing is that you really have to be in the moment and not thinking too much about what's going on and what you might have saved in places, and you just need something, for me, you just need something simple and applications, because even 1 bar is quite often more than you need. In some cases it is a bit like, oh, it would be great if I could capture 2, but it's great to have a limitation. So the only difference in these channels here, so this loop A, let's just have a look at loop A here, between loop A and deck A, is that we don't have here where we would have the strobe, we have a grid assignment instead. So we're controlling the size of the loop that's being caught in the beat repeat. And we can turn that on and off using the solo button. And what you'll notice is the solo button here is mapped to both the beat repeat on and the track activator. You'll also notice that the track routing here is pulling the audio from deck A, and it's set to monitor in. So the audio is just coming through this deck. If I put audio into this track here, it would be grayed out, it wouldn't play, because we're monitoring through effectively. And what this enables me to do when the beat repeat is set to insert, not to mix. So insert means that once it's activated, it's only playing the loop. It's not also playing the audio coming through anymore. And what this does is, as I'll demonstrate, if we just play, once I turn it on, you can see the audio here. It's coming through, but we're not hearing it. And when I activate this looper, I'll turn the main track off again. So we've caught a loop. And I can change the size of the loop after I've caught it. 1/6 is my favourite, especially combined with the pump. And combined with a little bit of reverb, maybe some delay, maybe a bit of a I can really just turn a tiny little loop into something really interesting, constrain what I'm listening to. Let me just open this up a bit more so you can see what I'm doing here. Just finding a nice little loop there that I can play with, Okay, and that is basically what's going on. Everything else is the same. The low pass filter, the parametric, the high pass filter, the kill switches, the pumping effect, the reversing effect, which actually isn't active on these tracks, and the kill switches. Everything else is the same except for this one extra control, or rather this replaced control, which is strobe on the main decks is now grid. And I have 2 set up for each one, because the other beauty of beat repeat is you catch a loop, okay, so you catch a loop, when you turn it off, it's gone. You can't get that back, it's gone. It was just that moment. You can't go, oh, I want that back on. You can't, it's gone. And I love that. It means you can catch a part of a track, you can play with it a bit, turn it off, it's gone. You're moving forward all the time. What you can do though, and the reason why I've got 2 set up, is because it's quite nice to be able to turn it down. So it's still there, but I've turned it down, and then I can catch. So I've got a 1 bar loop here on loop A, and I've got a shorter loop so I've got a track here that's basically made up of 2 small loops. And I could then, on the same track then, I could launch another track. And then I could go to my next track here, for example, launch this off. Okay, so you know that's all 6 decks running there, and it doesn't sound like a mess. And I love that. I love the fact that I can build a track with those 6 parts. I can really play with them. I can capture a small loop from earlier on, you know. So that's why I've got this funky stuff like Strawberry Fields Forever and Smokestack Lightning, because you know you might not play that in a techno set normally, but let's just see what's going on with that. Oh, it's
nothing is real.
So, you know, I can throw stupid little ideas from tracks that would never work just in for a moment or two, catch a loop from them, you know, turn them down, bring them in and out. I can play with those ideas, and I can really I can have a lot of fun. And for me, having DJed for so many years and got so bored of just EQ, volume. I mean, you know, it's really important to master those things, you know, it really is. But after a few years of mastering them, where are you going to go from there? And that's why this, for me, just is fresh every time I play. Every time I play, it's fresh. And I can throw a little idea in and really work it. And that is only scratching the surface. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about what else you can do, but just as a short example, if I've got everything in here in live, running, clocked, and looking beautiful, I can also do stuff like this. I can add an extra track here with my Novation synth on it, and I can just have, okay, so you can't see, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to probably muck up the camera view a little bit, zoom, oh, try not to mess things up too much. I'm going to move up a little bit in the world. Okay, let's see what we can see here. Not quite enough. Bear with me a moment while I just mess with that a bit. So what we've got here now is a little bit of a broader setup. Got push on the left here. So of course, I'm not using that usually for the DJing part, but when I want to add extra stuff, it's great. So I've got my Novation peak here pounding out a very simple E bass line, which I can control from here. So I can replace the bass line with that. I could also use my 505, which is trusty 505 over here, you know, which is literally just taking a signal. And as you can see, if I go into my note mode here, I've got on the push here, I can program my okay, and you know, possibilities are endless. I can drag in parts of stems of my own tracks. I can drag in edits of tracks that I've done, small clips of stuff from my own projects, all that kind of crazy stuff. And I can play it alongside, so you know, there's no limit. Now that I've mastered this, like the Vestax is my instrument. I don't have to think about where things are. I've been refining this template for years, and although things do slightly change sometimes, I know exactly where everything is, as you do on your DJ mixer. When you're familiar with it, you know where everything is. You don't have to think about it, and that's the beauty of it. And when you've got to that stage with it, then adding something like a little bit of drum programming or a little bit of extra synth is easy, and people are doing it, and that is how to push the envelope of your sound and how to sound different. And sounding a bit different and having an identity to your sound is really critical, because you know, anybody can DJ, but not everybody can make good sets, you know, and that's really what it all boils down to. And there's just one last little very short thing I want to show you, because I know we've been going for nearly an hour now, and that's well over what I had hoped to do, but I didn't want to rush this too much. I just want to show you, for those of you, yeah, I'm going to have to just call up my Finder here, applications. I just want to show you that thanks to Ableton Link, which some of you again will be familiar with, if you're a massive fan of Traktor, and I'm just going to be really very quick here, we now have the option of linking using the link feature. So basically synchronizing Ableton and Traktor. So you could run your controller for Ableton alongside your Traktor controller, whatever you wanted to use, whether you wanted to use vinyl, timecode, or an S4, or any of the other NI control devices that you might want to use, and everything will be okay, so that was just a final touch there. There's obviously a lot more detail to it, but I don't want to go, I can't really go any further with that. As a final note, I'm just going to open up. Now, this is my DJ template. It's a little bit different because it has a few things in it, third-party devices, but I have created a Live 9 and an Ableton Live 10 version of my template, which I'm giving away for free for all of you who've tuned in and paid attention so beautifully to this webinar. It's available via my brand new Gumroad account, and this is what it looks like. It's almost identical. I've tidied it up a little bit. What you need to do is you need to open this up in your Live 9 or Live 10, and you need to go through the process of mapping all the various parameters, but I've made it really easy. I've grouped everything so you can see what needs mapping in here. All of these parameters here are the ones that I've mapped, plus, just as a little note, the kills here are the only additional thing that you'll need to map. You'll also need to remember the little trick about mapping the beat repeat on and off button to the same activator for that track. And everything else should be fairly self-explanatory, but of course I'll add some notes, and of course this tutorial will also be available on Ableton Live Producers Online, so you can run through how that mapping worked and you can set your own template up. It's available on, let's have a look, on my Gumroad account, which should look a little bit like this. It's for free at the moment. I might put a small price on there. If you want to buy me a beer, please do. It's, you know, I don't make a lot of money out of doing this. It is a struggle, but it's a happy struggle. But I'd really appreciate any donations. Of course, if you don't feel that you can, then that's cool. I think I'm getting pinged now. So accept and join. We're going back to the webinar. Hopefully, we're going back to the webinar. How do I go back to the webinar?
Yes, we are. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Welcome. The audio is temporarily muted. Click the. I need to stop the stream.
Okay.
Stop